And what I would like to speak here in the remaining 14.5 minutes I still have is basically the research question I'm planning to answer is how this new form of Russian warfare is different from the conventional forms of asymmetric warfare, or with other words, the asymmetric warfare as we've known it before. And thereafter, we will try to make a bit of an outlook as well. And of course, I mean, in front of such a distinguished audience, there is not much need to speak too much about the development of asymmetric warfare. However, as always, we're not starting from Sun Tzu this time, but we go for the version B, and we start from Clausewitz. And the famous saying is very important, warfare is a political tool, we all know that. But Clausewitz also made a differentiation between asymmetric methods and symmetric methods. And asymmetric go into the direct objectives and indirect objectives of warfare. And if you don't see it properly, one option is that you sit closer. Another option is that I will leave the PowerPoint here, so you no need to take notes. Why the difference between direct and indirect warfare is important? Direct warfare was called by Clausewitz as a form of warfare aimed at destroying the enemy or fundamentally breaking its ability to resist, while indirect warfare has been aimed just to exhaust your enemy and basically to make it ready to accept the deal. So this is the indirect warfare. It will be an important part later. And if we go through the development of asymmetric warfare, 19th, 20th century, Lawrence of Arabia, or Thomas E. Lawrence, has been the first one who discussed in detail, after Sun Tzu of course, the importance of rough, difficult terrain hard to pass for the purpose of asymmetric warfare. And then Vladimir Ilyich, he also contributed a lot to the theory of asymmetric warfare, particularly by addressing the need for propaganda, not only to discourage your enemy, but also to mobilize your own society. And it was Lenin who first officially put into the theory the legitimized option of destroying the leaders of the enemy, which you may also call it like a certain form of terrorism, as he put it. But anyways, in the theory of asymmetric warfare, it was Vladimir Ilyich Lenin who first discussed in detail that it's a legitimate form of warfare, that you go after the very leaders of your enemy. And both Mao Zedong and Tito, they both realized that simply irregular forces alone are hardly and rarely able to defeat committed regular forces. So both Tito in Yugoslavia and Mao Zedong in China, they both argued for the need to use regular and irregular forces in a combined way. Mao Zedong put it like the two arms of the body. The two arms have to work together in order to reach the final goal. This will also be important a bit later. And of course, the great Vietnamese theoretist Nguyen Giap, he also argued, though from a different basis, that indirect warfare needs to gradually develop into a full-scale direct warfare in order to completely defeat your enemy. And a much less known theoretician, Carlos Marighella, from South America. Carlos Marighella, who actually wrote a handbook of the urban guerrilla. And many countries which experience the riots are very lucky because the works of Marighella are not that widely translated. I mean, what Marighella has written is still actually in very many sense, so I recommend you all to go to the beautiful building of the National Library and try to look up Marighella. You will find very interesting things, even though his work was written 40 years ago. And why hybrid war is in quotation marks? Because if we keep reading about the literature, of course, right now hybrid war became something very, very popular, right? In each and every Eastern European society, there are a few issues everybody is an expert on, right? Football, driving, and now hybrid war. However, hybrid war originally has meant something different. I mean, if you read the literature carefully, both McEwen and Nemeth, and later with Thomas Hoffmann, hybrid war as a term was originally used for characterizing the very fluid, hard-to-define warfare that the coalition forces met in Iraq. 10 years, actually, before Russia's recent operations. So hybrid war originally was defined as a combination of modern technology, modern mass mobilization, and modern communication as well. The first terms were used to describe the Chechen wars, and then the hybrid war literature has developed a lot while describing the specific form of warfare in Iraq, starting basically from 2003. The Hoffman definition is quite important for us. According to Hoffman, hybrid war could be defined as a form of warfare which is composed of the four tools used in a combined way: conventional weapons, irregular tactics, terrorism, and cooperation with organized crime groups. This is the original meaning of the hybrid war. So, of course, this leads us to the question, if hybrid war is a term already used, then how should we call the form of warfare we've seen in Ukraine, both in Eastern Ukraine and the Crimea? Because hybrid war, I mean, originally, as we've seen, it's something different. The term has already been used. I mean, this name has already given to a child. And I very much liked the non-linear war concept proposed actually by Mark. However, we are in an unlucky situation that NATO has started to officially use the hybrid war. So the debate, the terminological debate, seems to be decided, could still be a good article, a theoretical article about how to name this thing. But since NATO, the alliance, has officially started to use the hybrid war, from now on I will stick to the hybrid war expression. And there is no need to speak much about, in front of such an audience, how this new generation of warfare, as Russians call it, has developed. The Gerasimov doctrine, also mentioned by Mark, is anyways a milestone in developing this form of warfare. The red parts are the important, so often with Russia. So the aim is not to destroy, but to disable your enemy state and armed forces, so not to kill the enemy soldiers physically if not necessary, but to break their morale and ability to resist. And the main front, as it was pointed out also by Yanis in his good article about this hybrid warfare, is that the human psyche is the main front where this new type of warfare is waged. Therefore, of course, information operations play an integral coordinated role in conducting warfare in this way. We will hear much more about the details from the lecture coming after me. So my contribution to the debate, which I hope I will be able to write a longer piece soon after I'm done with the Christmas family visits and drinking, so hopefully in January, is first, what are the prerequisites of the hybrid war? Because after the Crimea operation, if you read the Western press, many people had the impression, many people were writing about this type of warfare as a new Wunderwaffe, something which is undefeatable, something which is unexpected. Not actually. I mean, there are certain prerequisites which are necessary for hybrid war being waged. First and foremost, as it was also pointed out, of course, by NATO analysts, that it's an absolute must that Russia has to be stronger than the country, I mean militarily, than the country it tries to attack. Because all over the Crimea operation, the threat of a conventional, massive conventional attack from mainland Russia against the other sections of the border, all along during the Crimea operation, this functioned as a deterrence. Ukrainian resistance was, Ukraine also decided not to resist because they were afraid of a large-scale, massive conventional Russian attack from the east and from the northeast. So this factor plays a key role in the efficiency of this hybrid warfare. So, as a prerequisite, Russia has to be stronger than the targeted country, and the targeted country shall not have a collective defense guarantee. Because if the targeted country can rely on the help of a larger military alliance, then the credibility of the conventional attack as a deterrence factor is much less. It practically disappears. Point number two, and again, methodologically we're in a hard situation because so far our sample is not that big. We've seen one operation conducted fully in Crimea and one operation conducted in half, that's Eastern Ukraine. However, one may well presume, particularly if one reads Gerasimov with eyes open, is that another prerequisite is that the targeted country needs to have or shall have weak central power and weak state structures with heavily corrupted Silovic organizations, with badly functioning public administration, police of not that strong morale, So the weakness of a targeted country seems also to be a prerequisite. Again, I'm not posing here as somebody who knows the ultimate truth, so all these statements should be debated. I mean, if you have different opinions, I'd be really glad to improve this research. Third, the political factor. It also plays a role. I mean, there needs to be lasting regional dissatisfaction with the central power on which the hybrid war can be built. So in the Crimea, this regional dissatisfaction has been connected with the 2 decades-long failures of the consecutive Ukrainian governments to properly address the demands of the specific demands of the population in the Crimea, and also in eastern Ukraine. I mean, following the change of power in Kiev, in eastern Ukraine, I wouldn't say that the fears about fascists coming to power in Kiev, I wouldn't say that all those fears were completely ungrounded. I mean, in late February, around 25th, 28th February, I mean, what was the very first move of the Ukrainian government? I mean, Kiev was still in flames. The very first move they started with is to abolish the language law. I mean, President Turchinov interim President Turchinov was smart enough not to sign this law finally, so it didn't come to force. But the first signs were actually quite, I understand that the eastern Ukrainian population got worried. So again, both in the Crimea and eastern Ukraine, what we saw, that the lasting regional dissatisfaction with the central power functioned as a factor on which the Russian non-linear offensive could be built on. And another more tactical element is that there is a need for a massive presence of Russian-speaking population in the region, because this allows little green men to conceal themselves being locals. I mean, ethnically I'm from Hungary. I mean, if I imagine little green men coming to Budapest and try to pretend as local Hungarians, good luck. I mean, this thing could work only in the Crimea and could work only in eastern Ukraine, because the massive presence of the Russian-speaking population allowed Russia to employ the discourse that these are not Russian special forces, these are just dissatisfied local people. Imagine trying the same thing in China. So this is also a prerequisite, which limits seriously the scope where this hybrid war can actually be employed. There is also, again, we don't know it for a fact. This is something inductive. From the 2 operations we see, one may inductively come to the conclusion that there is also a logistics requirement. The Crimea operation was conducted with the active support of the Russian troops already present in the Crimea. Those were the military bases which provided the logistics support for the operation. So, how I formulated it, either there has to be an earlier legitimate presence of Russian military on the ground, like in the Crimea, or in eastern Ukraine, the attacked region has to have a direct border with Russia with weak or non-existent border control, because this is the way you can provide the logistics for your operation. And here in the room, I'm pretty sure that there are many people who are much more experts in logistics than I am, so let me go to the 6th part, which seems to be obvious, I mean, half a year after the operation, media and information warfare superiority, which allowed the attacking forces to information-wise take over the attacked region and deny the central power from promoting its agenda in the region attacked. So these prerequisites, in my point, constitute an against the Wunderwaffe nature of the hybrid war. In reality, it has quite a limited scope where hybrid war can be used. Why was it so effective? First and foremost, it was unprecedented. It came as a surprise, it came out of the blue, and because Professor Galeotti was right, not that many people read the Vojenno-Promyšlenní Courier. So, because of the lack of precedent, there was also no elaborated defense. Now the situation is much more different. We are here, we are discussing the whole thing, we are thinking about that, but this was not the case during the Crimea operation. Second, the possibility that the attacking country could long deny its involvement formally. I mean, Estonian colleagues on the 2nd week of the operation published a very detailed analysis based on the weapons used, seen on the pictures and the technological background, So from the very beginning, it was obvious that those were Russian forces. I mean, with some locals involved, but mostly Russian forces. However, the deniability, it results in the lack of accountability. The attack country has no one to negotiate with. You don't have a partner to negotiate with. I mean, Russia could formally play that I'm not part of the game. You have to have an agreement with the separatists, either in the Crimea or Eastern Ukraine, which would have led to the scenario well known from Transnistria, Abkhazia, South Ossetia. This is the way how Moscow, 2 decades ago, made the separatists to be basically equal partners of the central power. They forced the Moldovan government in 1992 to sit to the same table with the separatists as equal partners. This was something, of course, the Kiev government simply could not afford. And, which was not the case, but theoretically the option was there, because Russia formally denied its involvement, theoretically it would have stopped the operation at any time. Little green men just disappear, and that's it. It would have been possible if Russia would have been forced to do so. And of course, we already discussed that the attack country could hardly differentiate between who are the real attackers and who are just local civilians because of this disguise of the attacking forces. And taking into account Russia's readiness and often declared willingness to use force to protect its own compatriots, this factor strongly limited the ability of the Ukrainian government to use force, even if it had been able to do so. And of course, we already touched upon the main factor why it was so effective, because of the constant danger of an overwhelming, massive attack by the conventional Russian forces lined up along the border with Ukraine. Now in eastern Ukraine, this kind of backfired after Kiev realized that the massive troops, I mean the tens of thousands of troops often lined up on the Russian side of the border, were actually not attacking. They were there, they were posing a threat, but they did not cross the border until actually August. And still in August, much lesser forces entered Ukraine than the forces which were lined up all along the border. And the communication stuff will be touched upon later by experts who are much better in information warfare than I am. And here comes the answer to the research question: why hybrid war has been new? What are the novelties of this hybrid war? First and foremost, that's why I refer to Clausewitz. Usually, according to Clausewitz, asymmetric means have always been used by the weaker side, right? To resist against the stronger regular army. Here in the hybrid war, it's very interesting because it was the stronger side which relied on asymmetric means. Second, even though hybrid war for a long time remained asymmetric, basically until the anti-terror operation in eastern Ukraine started to gain momentum, despite it remained asymmetric, it was still able to achieve direct objectives, namely the capture of territory, what we've seen in Crimea. Third, we already discussed that the formal involvement of the attacking country could be denied for long. So formally only proxies were engaged, actually are still engaged, except the Russian soldiers spending their holidays on voluntarily fighting in eastern Ukraine. I mean, based on that, the Russian army is the most liberal workplace on earth. I mean, imagine I go on holiday and take my tanks. This is something usually I'm not afford when going to holiday, but I could just still enroll. Contrary to the original theory of both Mao Zedong and Giap, and also to a certain extent Thomas Lawrence, here in the Crimea case and partially to the eastern Ukraine case, the outside military force, the regular force of the attacking country, did not actually participate in the attack. So it was not the two arms strategy of Mao Zedong, it was just the possibility of an attack which was maintained, and this disabled or seriously weakened the resistance capability of Kiev. Point number 5 was already discussed. It's not that much new in itself. I mean, irregulars mostly merge with the local population. I mean, partisans rarely dress up like partisans, they dress up like locals. The new element here was Russia's readiness to use force in the defense of its compatriots, which together really limited the ability of Kiev to use force. Many people called this type of tactics is the Palestinian tactics. However, there is a difference here. in the case of the Palestinian forces fighting, or Palestinian insurgents fighting the Israeli forces, there is no outside threat present. So no one would take a revenge, no conventional attack would be launched in revenge of the death of some Palestinian insurgents. So this is a big difference compared to classic Palestinian tactics and what we have seen in the Crimea and Eastern Ukraine. And another important thing, quite different to the earlier conventional forms of asymmetric warfare. Hybrid war, in fact, did not really require massive support of the local population, just the illusion of it, just the image of it. I mean, even in July, August, separatists in Eastern Ukraine were complaining, I mean, Russian separatists in Eastern Ukraine, they were complaining that the local population was not that supportive. I mean, in cities of 1 million people like Donetsk, you could see pro-Russian demonstrations of 2,000, 3,000. Give me enough cash in a week, I can organize you 2,000 demonstrations here in front of the barracks in 1 week time. Getting 2,000 people together is nothing. It's not real local support. So it's not the local support the partisans of Tito had, or the partisans of the Pripyat marshes had. In reality, the local population was not that much of supportive of the active military actions taking place right in their neighborhood. However, if one reads Russian television, and it's much better than the morning coffee, so I recommend to everybody, I mean, to start your day with Russia Today, perfect. If you watch that, you would have the impression that the whole Eastern Ukraine is just rising up against Kiev, or there was a massive anti-Kiev movement in Eastern Ukraine. In fact, there wasn't. This was a constructed thing, a constructed local support instead of a real, meaningful, popular support. At least on the tactical level. I mean, the strategic level, if the local population is massively against you, hybrid war may become much less effective. We don't know it yet. We may guess, yet we do not know, because the events are not there. And another novelty, unlike classic asymmetric warfare, hybrid warfare does not depend on the terrain at all. I mean, if you read the classic partisan literature, they've been always hiding in the forests, in the marshes, or in the endless deserts of the Arabian Peninsula. This type of new warfare, asymmetric warfare, which is absolutely independent from the terrain. You can operate it in plainlands, you can operate it in the cities. This is connected to the real-time, very close coordination between the various actors of Russia involved in the conflict. And the extremely intensive coordinated information warfare will be addressed much more in detail by the next lecturers. So all in all, my point here, and I'm ready to debate that this hybrid war thing is not that much new. It's not the brand new tool. It's more, the innovation is how the old tools have been used in a new, much more coordinated way. And from all these, we may conclude that this hybrid war has a number of weaknesses as well. What we've seen in Eastern Ukraine, in the beginning it started quite similarly to the Crimea operation. However, because of a number of reasons not to be discussed here, what we have now, basically since the anti-terror operation started to gain momentum after the election of President Poroshenko on the 25th of May, the irregular forces in Eastern Ukraine managed to get into the same situation like so many irregular forces happened to be in the military history earlier. An irregular force cannot really hold the territory against advancing regular armies. I mean, if you have to really go straight and fight against an army, when you have only light infantry and some occasional artillery support, but these irregulars had to fight against Ukrainian army using not only infantry but also armor, artillery, airstrikes and all that. It was not surprising that these irregular forces were losing ground. They just couldn't hold the territory against the advancing anti-terror operation, which resulted actually in Russia's direct military attack, massive military attack in the middle of August. Because separatists were close to losing both Donetsk and Luhansk, and Russia couldn't afford that. So at a certain point, if the attack country is able to resist militarily, the hybrid war may quickly get transformed into normal conventional warfare. Point number two, if it gets transformed into conventional warfare, all the hindrances and negative effects of being involved in a conventional war start to occur. Political and economic costs, sanctions, the whole thing costs a lot, military losses occur, consequently you have to pay higher domestic price as well, because nobody likes his or her son coming back home in a body bag. So if the hybrid war gets transformed into a regular war, all its competitive advantages get lost. And from then on, you have basically a conventional military conflict with all its already known parameters. Third, but probably perhaps the most important from the perspective of many small countries neighboring Russia, if the deterrence element, namely the danger of a massive conventional attack from Russia, can be neutralized, for example by collective defense, meaning NATO, then most probably the whole hybrid war loses its effectiveness. Because to go very blunt, I mean, if the first little green man appears, okay, in Budapest, if we trust NATO collective defense, what would prevent the Hungarian forces from simply shooting or capturing the guy? That's it. If you can trust in collective defense, if you have a collective defense guarantee, and you have a well-functioning state, which I'm not going to comment in the case of Hungary, you can easily suppress the hybrid war right immediately when it starts. And my final point here, and again this is something to be debated, in my opinion, hybrid war, particularly because of the information warfare element, is strongly culture dependent. You can use it only in a certain culture. Because for strong information warfare, you need to employ the same language, the same discourse, like the attack country. And I'm absolutely not sure that this new way of warfare Russia could employ efficiently, let's say, against Uzbekistan or against China, simply because the culture is different. I'm not sure in that point, ready for debating it, but still I think it's an important factor. And of course comes the question, where else it's possible to use this new hybrid warfare? Ukraine again, basically at any time. Moldova at any time, because all the prerequisites are met. Weak state, regional dissatisfaction, lack of credible alliance, all that. I think under certain conditions, Belarus and Kazakhstan may also be endangered. Certain conditions means if the strong leader disappears. Because otherwise, all the factors are present. But as long as President Lukashenko and President Nazarbayev are there, I think the danger is not acute for either of these countries. Kyrgyzstan is a bit different story. And I think because of the collective defense and because of the prerequisites are not met here, Baltic, it's highly unlikely that anything similar would happen here in the Baltic states. And again, a theoretical question, are we sure that China is not going to learn this method? If I were the Chinese, I would intensively study what's happening. So I wouldn't be surprised in a few years' time to see little polite Chinese men appearing somewhere in Southeast Asia. Thank you for the attention.